What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here, doing another pretty interesting matchup, at least to me, that being the Sannin in the respective peaks in the series against the Gokage that fought Madara, excluding Tsunade, of course. That being said, make sure to like and subscribe if you're new here, and let's get into the video. Now, in terms of lore, the Sannin require little to no introduction, being disciples of the touted god of shinobi, at least in part 1, Hiruzen Sarutobi, labeled the Professor, leading to them becoming absolute animals in their own right. Now, everybody's going to start this video off with the part 1 Hiruzen statement. Hiruzen having a reputation as the strongest of the 5 shadows. I see a lot of people do this when talking about the Sannin in relation to Hiruzen. All of the Sannin are, relative to one another, equal. This is stated in multiple databook entries as well as displayed in the series. They also link Orochimaru's performance against Hiruzen to this statement, with more statements such as Orochimaru and Hiruzen being evenly matched. Problem is that Orochimaru was only really able to tangle with Hiruzen after Hiruzen had expended loads of chakra dealing with Hashirama and Tobirama, along with Hiruzen overcoming his feelings towards killing his former student, which Enma notes he was struggling with his resolve even now. In the short flurry that Orochimaru and Hiruzen fight, Orochimaru instantly gets disarmed by Hiruzen and gets held down for the Reaper Death Seal. The anime extends this little scuffle a bit more, but even by that point, Hiruzen was so exhausted he couldn't even disperse his chakra into shadow clones. So this isn't really to discredit the Sannin, but more so to give credit to Hiruzen, who Orochimaru concedes would have performed vastly different if in a slightly more prime state. A lot of people also point to the Kage improving or maybe maintaining their strength in the years following. An example maybe being the Raikage lifting weights. However, the War Arc does offer a pretty blatant display of Hiruzen also completely overshadowing the 5 Kage, who got manhandled by Giru. So the lore aspect more so depends if you believe that Sannin at any point surpassed the 3rd Hokage, which I think is very fair considering, a lot of statements are made with like base Jiraiya, who goes on to display Sage Mode, or Orochimaru, who improves later on in the series after absorbing his chakra from Kabuto and gaining intel, allowing him to perform a more accurate version of the Edo Tensei. This also extends to Tsunade here, who goes from like being a rival to base Kabuto to fighting alongside the Raikage and other Kage against Madara. So the Sannin do display feats above when these statements are made. So you could definitely make a stronger case for them in the lore aspect, whereas the 5 Kage remain a little bit more stagnant in their strength, excluding Gaara, of course. To wrap up the lore aspect, the Sannin tier is what's considered acceptable to be a Hokage candidate, with, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru all being candidates at one point, with Hokage generally being the strongest of the 5 Kage. So there's a lot there to take into consideration. So generally the Sannin do seem to have the lore advantages based on statements made about them, Hiruzen, and their improvements. Just a lot to say. In terms of speed, the only Kage who can really be argued to be faster than the Sannin is the Raikage. Tsunade, ironically, actually has like the best speed feats against Madara. A lot of people would probably argue that she was faster than the Raikage if Madara himself didn't concede that the Raikage was faster than her. Just off the fact that like a lot of like the blitzes on Madara, even his clones, do come from Tsunade, weirdly enough. Mei isn't really too questionable, especially since she was the first one to be taken out by the Wood Susanoo clones, with Gaara having to save her, leading to him being taken out. You can maybe make a case that Gaara might have sand speed superior to any of the Sannin. I think this point could be debatable. A lot of people will just base it off Raza, which, I mean, if you take like Orochimaru assassinating Raza as any proof, like maybe Orochimaru just straight up blitzed him with his Kusanagi blade, as the Kazekage did have his own personal guard. But that encounter is obviously a little vague, so I don't want to use that as like a main selling point. I would say Onoki's jutsu speed is probably going to be more relevant in this matchup. Onoki's particle style speeds being superior to the KCM Naruto clone's combat speed based on Lord Mu's assessment, with Inoki being able to stonewall move for a prolonged period of fight. But since I know a lot of people are going to stick on the Raikage point, this is how I'll kind of address it in relation to like Tsunade and, by extension, the other Sannin. Tsunade seemed prepared to actually stop and fight the Raikage when he was blocking Naruto and B from passing, even after witnessing his like version 1 and version 2 cloak speeds. So I would say even if he's faster, I don't believe it's to the degree where he's like massively above her to the point where she can't perceive or defend herself. I don't believe like the speed difference would be that great, especially if she's like willing to fight him and thinks that she can fight him. I think that does say something after witnessing his speeds. Now, with that being said, Tsunade is actually going to be the easiest of the Sannin to tag, which isn't too much of an issue considering that's kind of her style of fighting, with her regenerating from Madara Susanoo swords, with Orochimaru and Jiraiya being much more difficult to actually take on, especially if Jiraiya does go into Sage Mode, as that's a win condition for the Sannin. I'll get into this when discussing how the fight would go, with Orochimaru depending on like if you believe he scales to Hiruzen or not, or like maybe he's he surpasses Hiruzen. The war arcs does seem to imply that as such, as they're able to like keep pace with one another when destroying the God Tree roots. Not to read too much into it, but just to note it. Now, in terms of AP, the Sannin actually should have more of an edge in this category, as Tsunade is the strongest of the Kage in terms of physical might, so should actually be able to kill any member of the Gokage. With Orochimaru and Jiraiya being much more threatening with their hacks, Orochimaru's Kusanagi blade is not going to be able to pierce the Raikage's cloak, which a lot of people could probably already infer with the Four Tails Naruto cloak tanking it. With more confirmation maybe being from Sasuke's remarks about his Kusanagi blade being on another level than Orochimaru's, with the Raikage literally just not moving when Sasuke attempts to slash him with his own sword. Orochimaru will be able to decapitate all the other Kage though if he wants, with it being more questionable if they could kill him, as even without his jutsu, he doesn't believe Itachi's Susanoo sword swings are remotely threatening to his life after getting impaled by one. So I think that does say something to like what he's able to come back from. The same obviously applies for Jiraiya too. Now, I would probably say Gaara-san can defend against most of what the Sannin can do, as it was just shown blocking multiple swings from Madara Susanoo clones. So they're actually going to have a ridiculously hard time breaching Gaara-san, as it's shown very potent, but that's really the extent of it. The Kage are more so going to be relying on particle style and the Raikage for like their strongest attacks. Gaara's Sand might be, somewhat usable, but Mei's Lava Style really won't be able to do anything while being considerably slower than the former and their attacks. If you need evidence of that, Sasuke in the 5 Kage Summit, while extremely fatigued, could still react to the technique. Now that we're kind of aware where everybody lies, let's talk about how this fight would go. But before we talk about how this fight would go, I want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, Boomslank. Now, if you're like me, you like to indulge in anime drip from time to time, but if you're also like me, you notice that a lot of expensive anime gear doesn't really look that unique. It seems like they just slapped a PNG on a shirt and called it a day. This is not the case with Boomslank. Boomslank has a vast apparel range spanning from shirts, phone cases, wall prints, banners, and more, all with unique and ridiculously sick looking graphics. And honestly, the coolest part is that it's all custom artwork done by the owners of Boomslank, none of those licensed artwork PNGs that they slap on a shirt that a lot of anime gear, display and quite frankly look out of place. Boomslank is completely original and gives off such a unique vibe that you'd be missing out if you didn't check them out. You like Gurren Lagann, Gundam, Studio Ghibli? These guys like give that type of vibe. So I highly recommend you check them out. And if you do see something you want or you want to support me, make sure to use the code THUNDER_God YT for 10% off your entire order, or just click the link in the description. On to the fight. For the Gokage, I actually don't want to sit here and repeat information since this video is actually decently long, but I have like 2 videos on, perfect Gokage to fight Madara and Obito, where I discuss the Gokage in more detail, who they stack up and who they scale to and their abilities and whatnot. So check those out if you want more like on the Gokage. Not to skip over it, but I'm for the sake of preserving time. Now, coming into this battle, assuming all characters are in base, the Kage are going to be at a distinct disadvantage on the surface, as the Sannin have far more regeneration hacks, mitotic regeneration, Orochimaru's body replacement jutsu, and if Jiraiya gets Sage Mode, he gets enhanced Sage Mode durability, which will make it much harder for them to be killed in comparison to the Gokage, who really have none of that. The Sannin are a lot more versatile in what they can do in this fight, an example being how they can use their respective summons and form the 3-way deadlock. However, the Raikage, again, is going to be the biggest issue for the group. I don't believe he outclasses the Sannin to such a degree, as we discussed earlier, where he'd be able to decapitate them. This is probably, if you did go down this road, most probable for Jiraiya, as he needs time to go into Sage Mode. This method also isn't even effective against someone like Orochimaru due to the nature of his body replacement jutsu, with fighters like EMS Sasuke remarking that Kabuto wouldn't be taken down easily off the lore of having the same abilities as Orochimaru, so his regeneration abilities are considerable. Let's assume that this fight starts and Tsunade takes the Raikage on, as she's seen his speeds, she's had interactions with him in the past. If you go off the anime, that fight would take time. Even if the Raikage was just bullying her, she would continuously regen from whatever he dished out, which does leave Jiraiya and Orochimaru to fight the other Kage. Jiraiya at this point would probably run away, trying to go into Sage Mode, with the possibility of summons to stall for him, with the Orochimaru left behind. Now, aside from Onoki, nobody among the 3 can take Orochimaru down. Even if he does get hit with like the weighted boulder jutsu, he can just discard the body previously used almost instantly before he's overwhelmed. A sand burial might be possible, but Orochimaru really shouldn't have a big problem with the group, as he actually summoned Edo Tensei at this point, that being the previous Hokage to fight him. This being an enhanced version used by Kabuto, allowing him to draw out more power from the Edos than seen previously. Now, If Orochimaru does summon Kage like Tobirama or Hiruzen, this fight does become an instant L for the Kage. Now, it also is equally possible that Orochimaru might not be able to control the Kage, as he did use the Zetsu as a corpse originally, with Tobirama remarking how he was about to flex out the Edo Tensei if it wasn't like buffed by Hashirama's DNA. This also does get into like Orochimaru having bodies on deck for the Edo Tensei, which I actually think is a fair assumption, as he has hideouts with loads of prisoners for his varying experiments, along with like Kabuto noting he needs a certain blood type person for his scroll. So these guys have bodies on decks for their jutsu, so I don't think it's that outlandish to say he can use Edo Tensei. Now, this also does somewhat depend on if you think Onoki's particle style is like faster than Orochimaru, because if it is, I mean, he kind of gets wiped here. But I'll say, since Onoki more than likely didn't improve over like the years passing after Hiruzen, with Orochimaru improving from the years going forward, I don't believe his particle style would blatantly wipe Orochimaru. It definitely can wipe Jiraiya for sure, unless Jiraiya, you know, does something. But this is more so how I see this fight going, especially since Orochimaru is going to be fighting multiple opponents. The reason I also point to Orochimaru, you know, going for Edo Tensei off rip is because I would make the case that he's probably going to do, like, even if he uses a jutsu off rip that gets negged by particle style, he will realize that on some level, like, his jutsu won't have an effect. So it just seems very likely to me. Now, assuming that Tsunade and the Raikage like brawl for an extended period of time, like they go 1v1, and Orochimaru's like holding up the Kage, Jiraiya would have enough time to enter Sage mode. You know, assuming Orochimaru can control 2 to 3 Edo Tensei, where the tide would shift for the Sannin, Orochimaru's regeneration along with snake summons would allow him to stall. And if Jiraiya does enter Sage mode, the Sannin almost have a surefire victory via Genjutsu. Jiraiya would at the very least be able to take down Mei, who doesn't have any real substantial reaction feats or defensive capabilities. You can make a case that if Jiraiya in Sage mode and Orochimaru do get pressured, Jiraiya could drag actually a Kage into the Toad barrier, being very possible if he was able to drag a Path of Pain down against all 6 Paths of Pain when Pain is at full power. The manga doesn't show what happened, but the anime extends the interaction with Jiraiya weaving around the Pain's attacks and dragging one into a Toad barrier. Jiraiya and Orochimaru have more of a diverse arsenal compared to the remaining Kage, an example being how Jiraiya could potentially shoot Toad Oil on Gaara's sand, making it stick together and not fall apart. Realistically though, the minute either side starts losing members, it'll be over, with the Sannin having a much higher chance of eliminating Mei, making the battle into a 3v3. There are different approaches though the Gokage could take, the Raikage and Onoki being a key to victory for the Kage. If they aren't able to dispose of the group quickly enough, or they're more so relative, Onoki can make the Raikage lighter, which is, I favor much more if you're going to go down like the Raikage being too fast argument. I think this is much more easier and safer to say based on like everything that's happening in the series. If you say like lightened Raikage is going to be too much for all these people, and like Raikage is not going to let Jiraiya run away with his hands held like together for 5 minutes, I think that's very fine. Or you could even make a case that if any of the other Kage like give their chakra to Onoki, he can do the very expansive particle style that like one-shot all of Madara's Wood Susanoo clones. So the Gokage actually do have some sort of options for victory. It's just that Onoki can only shoot out so many particle style before he does fatigue himself. The way I see it though, if the Kage win, it's going to be in the early fight, but even then it's debatable if they're going to be able to blatantly overwhelm the Sannin, who have a much better chance of bouncing off each other and stalling until necessary win conditions are in play. Even if the Sannin do get injured, they have an actual medic on their team compared to the Kage, who run the risk of death in every encounter being lethal. But if Jiraiya does get into Sage mode, he does have his potential win con, that being the demonic illusion Toad confrontation chant. Pretty self-explanatory, no real way for the group to resist the Genjutsu. And on top of, you know, Jiraiya gaining access to a whole new plethora of techniques and his base stats being amped, he also has 2 additional fighters in Ma and Pa who actually can't act independently and assist him. So for example, like they'll throw smoke bombs down for him to cover and move around. So they actually can support him in more ways than just adding like potency to his jutsu. The Sannin have far better area of effect attacks with Jiraiya's Totoro, Orochimaru's Thousand Snakes. You can make a case Gaara or Onoki match that, but depending on the location, Gaara may not have access to that much sand unless he makes it underground, and Onoki can only shoot out so many particle style before he fatigues himself. This also isn't talking about how if the Sannin unload the 3-way deadlock, which, you know, Onoki can easily one-shot any of the summons. Maybe you could argue the Raikage too can as well, you know, since he like scales to the 8 tails, and him being able to like suppress the 8 tails in the past with the 3rd Raikage. But all this would do is open up more options for the Sannin. Like, Katsuyu doesn't even get affected by physical blows like that. So if the Raikage tried and punched her, she would just split apart. Jiraiya could just fly in the air with Gamabunta. There's a whole plethora of things where the Sannin just have this insane arsenal, whereas the Kage are more so like, they're not bad, but they're just not like, they don't have the diversity. So win conditions for the Sannin, really just being Jiraiya's Toad Genjutsu will be an instant victory for the Sannin. It's not very difficult to set up either. Or, you know, taking the Kage down one by one the minute it turns into a 3v3. The Kage will lose a ridiculous amount of momentum. Jiraiya can drag them into a Toad barrier, which might be probable if he can do it against full power pain. Maybe Orochimaru just straight up decapitates them and just, you know, they defeat the group through process of elimination. Win conditions for the Kage. Particle style, the Sannin really don't have any answer for it. It does kind of shred if it hits. Whether it hits or not is more so up to the person. Arguing the Raikage is too fast for the group. You know, I'm not the biggest on this, but I think a lightened boulder Raikage is much more safe to say. Maybe potential sand ceiling, but even slower fighters like the second Mizukage can just like take the tags off before whoever's like in the pyramid is sealed. So you could maybe say like the Sannin would just be able to bounce off one another and just remove any tags. So it's just a little hard to say. The Sannin do seem to have the lore advantage with better synergy and better arsenals, but that doesn't mean, you know, they like the Gokage can't win in any capacity. But I would say like more likely than not, the Sannin as a group generally would just be too much for the Gokage. Hopefully you guys are able to forgive me if like the nature of this video is a little weirder. It's a lot harder to talk about like a group battle like this by myself. I tried my best to like paint a decent scenario, but obviously it could just go whichever way you want to say. Like someone could fight someone because they don't like their nose or something like that. So, you know, take that as you will. Take it with a grain of salt. But that's the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Check out all the stuff I listed in the video down in the description and have a good one. Bye.